Chapter 2 Building the Titanic. The White Star Line decided to build 3 new ships. One would be named the Titanic. The names of all White Star Line ships ended in IC. Hundreds of blueprints and drawings were made. These plans would guide the workers during construction. The shipyard. The Titanic was going to be so big that a single slip, a ramp where ships are constructed, couldn't provide enough space. So 3 slips were turned into 2. Then a giant metal gantry was built over the slip. A gantry is a bridge-like structure that supports equipment such as cranes. This gantry was the largest in the world, almost 1.5 times the length of a football field and as high as a 19-story building. In March 1909, construction began at a huge shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Ships are built from the bottom up. First came the keel, which serves as the backbone of the ship and lies on its bottom. The keel is made of steel and supports the rest of the ship. After the keel was made, curved steel beams joined the keel to form a U-shaped frame. The upper decks of the ship would eventually be built on top of the beams. The framing of the Titanic took about a year and was completed in April 1910. Building the hull came next. The hull is the lower part of the ship that sits partly below water. It helps keep the ship afloat. It took about 6 months to finish the hull. First, thousands of large sheets of steel were cut and shaped into plates. Some plates were flat and some were curved. The plates were lined up side by side with their edges overlapping. Then rivets, large iron tacks, were heated and inserted into holes in the steel plates. More than 3 million rivets were used on the Titanic. The hull was divided into 16 separate compartments. Walls called bulkheads separated them. If for any reason the ship started flooding, watertight doors in the bulkheads would instantly shut. The flooded compartments would be blocked off from one another. The Titanic could stay afloat even if the first 4 compartments were filled with water. And it was hard to imagine any accident that would cause more flooding than that. Because of this, the newspapers called the Titanic unsinkable. They didn't say almost unsinkable. They said unsinkable. So, who built the Titanic? Over 15,000 Irish shipyard workers. It was a grueling job. They worked Monday through Saturday from 6 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. They had a 10-minute break in the morning and a half-hour off for lunch. It was dangerous work. 8 men died during the ship's construction. On May 31st, 1911, the hull of the Titanic was ready to be launched into the River Lagan. The black painted hull now had the upper deck and 4 smokestacks, but was empty inside. The launch would show whether the ship could stay afloat. Launching an ocean liner was a big event. It was exciting to see a giant, freshly painted hull pulled down a ramp into the water for the first time. Nearly 100,000 people gathered to see the Titanic's launch. J. Bruce Ismay, director of the White Star Line, watched from a special grandstand. Wealthy American businessman J.P. Morgan was also there. His company owned the White Star Line. When it was time, 2 bright red rockets exploded. This was to warn ships in the river to stay away from the launch site. It took 62 seconds for the hull to slide off its wooden platforms into the water. Yes, the Titanic was seaworthy. The workmen waved their hats and the crowd cheered. because the Titanic had no engine yet. Smaller boats towed it up to the river for a few minutes. Big anchors and cables prevented the ship from floating away. Then tugboats brought the Titanic back to the shipyard. Now it was time to work on the inside, to turn the shell of the Titanic into a palace on the seas.